All I had to do with that pup was teach him a little bit of obedience and introduce him to the game, wild game. That's all we had to do. The rest was up to them. Enhance staunchness by handling them on a point. Stroke them, pet them, whisper sweet nothings in their ears, and place a hand under the tail against the hindquarters, press, causing them to press against me. In most cases, I found them staunching up pretty fast. In Ted's case, it took till he was 2 years of age. We sat down one day on the hill in a fine hawthorn patch, and we took a break. It's time for us to have a talk. We had a talk, talking about all the females he might be friends with, in the future if he would only shape up, staunch up. Firmly believe he understood what I was saying. I shot high school. I shot on a rifle team 3 years, junior varsity, sophomore year, and junior, senior years of varsity. We had, it was a major sport on Long Island in those days, which surprises a lot of people today. I mean, you can imagine.
Well, back then, I didn't even know they had shooting teams on high school.
Matter of fact, the last year, we won the national scholastic championship. Five men on a team, and four of us made all scholastic, which is like top 10 in the region, not the country, in the legion.
And it
was a big thing.
And this was just rifle shooting? This wasn't shotgun?
Indoor rifle. Indoor rifle. And the finest rifles available at the time, accuracy-wise, was the Model 52 Winchester. And I bought one. I worked 2 summers, one summer, whatever it was. It was 2 houses, a house trim, painted house trim, to get enough money to buy this from a teammate who was graduating, to buy my 52 Winchester.
Well, did he at least give you a good deal since he was graduating and leaving?
I paid $150, but I sold it back to the school after I came down here. I just found the receipt, and digging through these old files, I was pulling out targets. I laid aside some special targets,
Imagine that you sold your rifle when you got done back to the school, and now schools nowadays, you can't take a rifle anywhere near a school.
No, and storing it in the locker, my locker in the school, walking through the school with it, on my shoulder.
Wow.
Even this is Long Island, New York. If you know what that country's like now.
What year was this?
Well, I graduated in 51, so started 49 with junior varsity shooting. 49, 50, 51 I graduated.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
1951, not
1851. Glad you cleared that up. Well, Walt, that right there.
You want to hear this?
Absolutely, I want to hear it.
Love it.
We're already rolling. I haven't even introduced you to the audience yet. This is the legendary Walt Lesser, everybody, and I figured that there's no better way than to just cut in on the middle of your story talking about rifle schools 60, 70 years ago.
Interesting.
So you grew up in Long Island, New York, obviously. So
I did.
Go back. Let's continue the story. You graduated from Long Island after, shooting competitively in rifle schools. Kind of what steered you? We're in West Virginia now, so let's fill in the gaps.
Okay. Went from there to New York State Ranger School in the Adirondacks, a high-pressure 1-year course. where we were on the Oswegatchie River. The school is located where it empties into Cranberry Lake, the Adirondacks. We were issued one canoe per room, 2 men to a room, and that was our only means of that and shoe leather locomotion. That was it for the year. And let's see, we get to go to town Saturday nights, of course, to have a beer with the loggers, and that was an entertainment. A few girls, but there were, town population of Wanakena was pretty small.
Yeah.
I
so
don't
selection
recall
was
what
few.
it was, but anyway. So that's where I started my education. I went from there to Syracuse, New York State. In those days, it was College of Forestry. Today, it's environmental ESF. Anyway, environmental studies and forestry. So that's where I met my wife to be, and I failed to say I grew up with a beagle, and all my hunting on Long Island was with beagles. Waterfowl, we didn't use dogs unless somebody we were hunting with had a retriever. Otherwise, we shot over decoys readily. But a beagle was my gun dog. I killed my first woodcocks on Long Island over a beagle, and ringneck pheasant too, of course, first one as a teenager.
Any grouse with this beagle? And I'm assuming this beagle is more of a flushing dog. I'm assuming.
Absolutely, strictly flushing. Yeah, but retrieving also. Yeah, my son had a beagle here that retrieved a grouse out of water right here, Chattanooga Creek. But nevertheless, I inherited a beagle at Ranger School, Art Flick Jr. As a matter of fact, the name Art Flick may be familiar to you.
It sounds familiar. I'm not familiar personally or anything, but it sounds familiar.
Well, he was not only a hunter; he was well known for his fly tying, fishing research in the Catskill streams, and his son was in my class, Ranger School class. And for some reason, we weren't supposed to have dogs at Ranger School, but he brought up this little beagle from home, and I inherited the beagle. I thought if he could get away with it, I could too. And we had a director of that school who was very sympathetic. He was a hunter himself, and very sympathetic he encouraged us in our spare time, of course, if we had any, to get out and get out with a gun, get out of the school, and so I inherited that beagle, and she was great on hares. Why Art wanted to let her go, I don't know. Of course, I enjoyed her while I was there, just chasing hares, snowshoe hares, of course. I left her there in the town of Wanakena with somebody who, an older person than I, who would take good care of her, even use her some. And when I got to Syracuse, after I got established there, of course, I got myself another beagle, a puppy, and this is the one that my wife took up with hunting over that beagle. She and I, instead of going to football games on Saturday, we go hunting. And Sunday too, sometimes, as you could legally do in New York State on Sundays.
And were you taking the beagle out for anything specific? Were you looking for birds, or is anything fair game pretty much hares, birds, whatever?
Rabbits at Syracuse, in that country there. Glaciated, really rich soil south of Syracuse. was good hunting for rabbits. And matter of fact, there was a plantation where we cut Christmas trees, a group of us, and sold to benefit a fraternity, a professional fraternity I belonged to at that time. But I killed my first grouse over that beagle in that area I described, and it was always something. And I've got a picture not on this glass, another one of my wife holding with the beagle at her side, holding grouse and rabbits in her hand.
Yeah. So how long did you stick with the beagles throughout your hunting journey?
We brought. She wanted her own beagle, so we got her a pup down here. My beagle's name was Briar. So we named her, or she named hers Patch. So we had Briar Patch. And before that time, I thought, so many grouse in those West Virginia hills. I really found myself wanting a bird dog. Not that I had been happy with the beagle, but I thought it's time for me to get involved with something else here. So I, at the same time, my thoughts at that time were, I looked through, read all I could about the various breeds, and thought that maybe a German Short-haired Pointer was what I needed to get into those thick, recently abandoned farms, reverting back.
So the short-haired dog you thought that was going to be a better fit for you then?
Well, as far as I knew nothing about it. Nobody I knew of around had bird dogs. There just weren't any there in that town. This was in Doddrige County, where I started my career, family, everything. My first, I think it was 5.5 years we spent there before coming to Elkins.
And this is now, you're with the West Virginia DNR?
DNR, correct. At that time, it was the Conservation Commission.
Okay.
West Virginia Conservation Commission. And at any rate...
was this as a forester, biologist? What position were you
wildlife biologist.
Okay.
Yeah. Working with private landowners, encouraging them to plant up odd areas on the farms. But as I said, the farms were going through, at that point in time, really worn out and going through natural succession of growing up. Quail were everywhere, and grouse in between the farms that had quail. There were grouse. And rich soils, much higher nutrition soils than these mountain soils we have here. Everything grew fast that way, which ultimately meant the disappearance of grouse, of course, and woodcocks, for that matter. We were getting sparse woodcocks here, and they could expect them anytime as long as we got in the right type of habitat. About that, I was asked to leave my post there in West Union and teach a couple courses at WVU, wildlife courses. This is in between wildlife professors. They only had a single wildlife professor in those days, and the one they had there left for a better paying job, I'm sure, a better job, period. So I don't know if you remember the name Robert L. Smith, but he was due in. He was the next, and Dr. Smith, and he was there for a lot of years. But in that gap between the two, I was asked to teach 2 courses in wildlife management. This meant me finding a residence in Morgantown, some place to stay during the week, and then I was to drive home. Weekends. On looking for a room, I knocked on a door. I was somebody advertising, or I was told there was a room available. I was met at the door by a gorgeous orange Belton setter, English setter, large, very large dog. So naturally, when I had the chance, I asked the lady who owned the house where she got the dog, or something about the dog. And she knew exactly. She got it from a friend of hers, and by the name of Evans, George Bird Evans, and his wife Kay. The dog was deaf in both ears, and that was the reason the dog was passed off to this lady. I ended up renting a room there, and when I did so, she assured me she'd introduce me to George Bird Evans, and she did. We actually were invited to a dinner at their house, and after which George played his classical guitar. That was a different experience for me also at that point, certainly, and delightful. Well, at that point in time, George had a litter of puppies, and apparently there was one there unspoken for, one at least, and George was taken with the idea that I was a biologist. He could, question, and anyway, he seemed to. He had an experience with a Pennsylvania biologist that was very fine. He really enjoyed that friendship, and I think he was looking my way the same way. So he thought I'd make a good home for that pup, which I did. His name was Jeb. The entire litter was named after Civil War names.
Okay.
And I had Jeb, named after General Jeb Stuart, I guess.
All right.
And his Dawn, George's Dawn, Old Hemlock Dawn, was out of the same litter.
Okay.
Pretty neat. So at the same time, he offered me the mother of these puppies. She was a setter bred by George Ryman, and at that point in time, the name didn't mean anything to me. But she was a blinker, what is called a blinker. In other words, she had this fear of birds flushing. She wasn't gun shy at all. But a bird flushing she would avoid. And he offered her to me because she didn't carry the name, the old Hemlock name, of course, being Ryman.
And didn't meet his criteria for breeding stock, I'm assuming.
Well, she did, and that's the reason he bred to her very much. She was gorgeous. She was built entirely different from the dogs he had at that time. His were large with a loping gait. He describes this in his books, and very large dogs. But Heather was not that way. She was more like 50 pounds, but closer coupled, tighter in, not long in body, with a beautiful, full shaped head, very finely cut. Full muzzle, not snipey nosed. And anyway, she was gorgeous. She had a gait that was outstanding. And I found myself just enamored watching her run straight back, holding her back straight and tail cracking to the side. She was just gorgeous, but she wouldn't point. And at the time, George took me out with her, and she would just walk at his side. And he'd wave a handkerchief in the air trying to get a range. She refused to leave his side. I thought, what the heck? I've got this puppy. I can be working with him, teaching him obedience. Same time, I could be working his setter. There were a lot of birds, as I said, a lot of quail, and a lot of birds available.
Enough birds to bring her through that.
I could work her. I was confident I could after talking to George and looking into what a blinker is, and she lived in the house with us, and that's all.
Not to interrupt you, I'm curious though. Way back then, you say looking into what a blinker is. Nowadays we just pull up Google or YouTube, we type it in, and boom, we have information.
Right.
When you went to looking into something like that, what did you go to the library? Were you word of mouth asking around from people that maybe have done it before? When you said looking into it, where was your information coming from?
Oh, just what I could find in books.
Okay.
Books, magazines. I read anything I could find. There wasn't anybody else around other than George. Now, George explained to me what this was all about. George Evans, of course, explained what a blinker was, and the reason he gave me at the time, the reason she was in that, she was soft. She wasn't she ran well, she had athleticism, but she was soft, easygoing, okay, and apparently whoever was working with her, training her, was too hard on her, causing this fault, the blinking fault to happen. So I worked her hard, and even in some cases planted a bird to have a controlled situation. And what she would do, she'd work beautifully up to that scent, hit it, and just circle around the bird and just go on, tail cracking. And she never got over it. I got my hopes built really high when I saw her one day, flash point. I got it. We can work on this, but that's as far as it got, just a flash point. She never came. So, fine, she was a brood bitch. During this time, all the while, I'm looking for somebody else. This is West Union now, away from George, quite a ways away from it. And I heard about, there was a traveling salesman coming through town. That was a dog man coming from Parkersburg, a meat salesman. He was into field trials, big time field trials, and tried to encourage me to go that way with what I had there. He talked about, I had no interest in field trials. It meant competition. And my thinking was, being a biologist, all I cared about was the wild birds and where they live, their habitat. And that was my interest. I just the competition part didn't mean a thing to me. I had Jeb working then, real good. And when this occurred,
So at this time, you have Jeb going pretty good. Somebody's in your ear about field trialing and competition, but it's just not sitting right with you.
Exactly. Not at all. And that was my interest. At the same time, this person told me about two men situated in a town, Pennsboro, two men that were into setters, Ryman Setters, and that they'd be interested to know I had this, the Ryman's Blue Heather. So I looked them up quickly, and these men had been hunting together. They were at that time, they were in the strongest, the hardest hunter of the two. His name was Burnell Davis. He must have been in his 50s. They've been hunting together since they were kids, really. The words were from their mouths that they didn't have decent dogs till they got the Ryman Setters, and they each had let's see, two. Oh, between them there may have been 3 dogs that were Ryman bred by George Ryman. So this was my beginning. They were enamored with this Ryman's Blue Heather I had from George Evans. From these men and their experience with Ryman was my beginnings to know who this guy was. And those stories, some of which are in the Setter book there, are some crude, some fascinating, but all of it fascinating one way or another. Anyway, I learned much. I learned much about grouse hunting with dogs and the Rymans from these two individuals, Bud Evans and this Burnell Davis, and they were dear to my heart. I spent a lot of time with them till, something happened between them. Hard to imagine that they could have known and hunted with each other for so many years and then had a falling out over a business matter. It was unfortunate, but that made it difficult for me in trying to keep up with each other, which I couldn't do. Bud Evans was older and didn't do as much hunting as a result. So I was happy for the times I did spend with him. But Burnell Davis he owned a motel right there in Davis and another building, the liquor store, as a matter of fact. State liquor store, he owned the building it was in. And he had nothing to do. His wife was a hairdresser, had somebody to take care of the small motel he owned in Pennsboro, right on Route 50, US 50. And so he was free to hunt every day he wanted to hunt or could hunt, and he did. Yeah, I really had some times with him. Yeah, he showed me around.
And so these are the guys that really kind of got your head spinning around the Ryman Setter and maybe forming some sort of direction that you were wanting to go with your dog?
Exactly. Yeah, we bred dogs together. They bred too, Ryman's Blue Heather. I failed to say George Evans did come back with his rough to breed to Heather one more time. This was 2 years after which he had the litter Jeb came out of, and the breeding failed. Nothing happened there, but we bred Heather to dogs, the Rymans. My choice, there was no question in my mind. When somebody said English setter, I just envisioned a true Ryman setter, bred by Ryman. I mean, that was it.
That was it.
Those dogs weren't the best, always the best form on point. But there was one day described in the book when Burnell Davis and I stood on the hill looking at his 2 setters on point down below. And he said to me, "Would you shoot a dog over something like that?" Tail down. And one was, there's a photo of him in the book. But it wasn't good style. Wasn't pretty at all, but they were locked into it. They had their bird, and that's what mattered,
Finding the bird took priority over looks on the bird.
They had that bird pinned, and that was it.
Yeah. So back then, it sounded like you guys had formed some little network here amongst each other, trying to figure out how to better the breed and continue the breed overall. What were some of the criteria that you guys would look at? Was bird finding the epitome? Was that the pinnacle of what really mattered to y'all, or at what point did style and looks and conformation? You've mentioned the gait a few times. Like, was there some sort of hierarchy that you guys used to determine which dogs you bred and which dogs you didn't breed?
It was, in those days, it was a matter of hunting ability. They knew what George Ryman, what criteria he used, and that was reflected, of course, in the dogs they had and the dogs I'm looking at. But I didn't get into the other details until later.
Okay.
And that's the rest of my story, I guess. Coming here to Elkins in 62, I'd still go back over there and hunt with some of those people. Well, Bud and Burnell both passed, but there were other friends I had made there in West Union who got to hunt with their first bird dog because of me. I'd go back, and join up with them a time or two. And of course, I was also involved with introducing turkeys to Doddrige County. The first turkeys, that those folks had seen.
Was this in the late 50s as well, early 60s?
Early 60s.
Okay.
It came here in 62. The first transplant we made of wild transplanted birds, not game farm stock.
Do you remember where you guys trapped them and transported them from?
Yes. In one case, I assisted in the catching of a couple hens and outside of Wardensville on the George Washington National Forest, and transported those birds to West Union. Actually, as a funny story, before that, somebody caught two gobblers, the very first birds that were moved into Doddrige County. This release site, which I had selected right in the middle of a 10,000 acre tract of timber. It was old growth timber, beautiful tract, and right in the center. It took us all day with a little Jeep to access the release site from US 50 into it and to get back out, And that's how we got those birds in.
And was that initial release successful?
Yes, it was, all in all. But to just quickly finish that story, I had to go back up to New York to attend my grandfather's funeral. And so my wife, Ellie, had to handle. She's the only other one who knew where the release site was. I didn't even tell the local conservation officer. But we had to make arrangements for him to use his Jeep, or he had access to a Jeep. Anyway, so Ellie and he transported the first two gobblers, the first birds, into that release site and let it go. Yeah, while I was away, I took a lot of gruff, or whatever you want to call it, from locals, releasing two gobblers and expecting reproduction. Anyway, we followed up with the hens, of course. That was the initial release. Getting back to the setters, shall we?
Yes, sir.
Other than me running back and forth hunting over there, we formed a group here in Elkins, in this area, not just Elkins, surrounding counties as well, a small group with these same setters and what we call Ryman type. The true Ryman setter, really died when George died. He had a severe stroke in 1955. And that essentially was the end of the George Ryman area. He died in November 1961, and at the age 72. Ellen Ryman, his wife, continued the operation of the kennels through 1963, when she married Carl Calkins in 1963. There was a group here, as I started to say, with these Ryman type setters. And yes, they became the name the Appalachian Rymans. And in other words, I myself cannot take credit for keeping the Ryman the Ryman name alive. It took this small group. I called it, in the setter book, I called it our circle of breeders. And several of us, and there's pictures and their dogs in here.
Yeah, the book that we keep referencing on here is The Real Ryman Setter that Walt Lesser wrote. That I'll have the link to this book in the show notes for anybody interested in this. But you guys formed essentially a small group of breeders.
Small group, yeah, a small group. We really, a couple of us, like this George Hansen, another George, enters into the.
I can't keep up with all the Georges.
I could understand that. And anyway, George and I started while together. He was a fisheries biologist located out of the same district office as I. Well, the district office was in Tyler County, adjoining Doddrige. So we got together often in our dogs. And George got a pup out of my first litter. Incidentally, and this is before we left. I got ahead of myself with the whole story, but he got Alderun. Alderun was my kennel name. I established it right from the start, and it's still in existence today, even though I haven't bred any pups in a long time. Nevertheless, Burnell Davis insisted on seeing the results of this breeding that I made. So he hunted with George and separately hunting with me, and gave his approval on what we had as far as grouse dogs. That was the goal I had anyway.
Typically, how were they hunting range-wise? Can you describe them in the woods for us?
I'll try. The Ryman Setter is a dog that they easily adapt to the habitat. In other words, real tight cover, they'll hold in and keep checking with the handler or hunter. More frequently than as the cover opens up, they will extend their range. And this is sort of typical for these dogs. So I would call it generally moderate range, but people hunting the Ryman types now in the West on prairie grouse, expect more range out of the dogs naturally. But the same way, these Ryman types are bred to they just naturally adjust to the cover density.
Okay.
Trying to think of where I was now.
So Davis was interested in seeing the pups. He gave his approval for you and George to continue.
He did, yeah. He insisted we only breed the best to the best. Those were his words. Yeah, constantly after us, not to deviate. And that's what we tried to do. This small group of folks here.
So y'all aren't necessarily trying to match up characteristics or specific qualities. You know, maybe this dog over here has the style or point that you want. This dog over here has the huntability that y'all want, or the searching capabilities. Y'all were just trying to pick the best of the best all around dog with the best all around dog.
We tried to stay with the criteria as George Ryman himself had said. In other words, short coupled, full heads, full muzzles, and well-defined skulls. Tail on point varied with different folks as they do today, but I and the rest of my compadres in those days expected the tail to be either straight out or slightly raised.
So not 12 o'clock, probably
not 12 o'clock like the field trial is.
Yeah,
prefer
9 to 10 or 11 o'clock,
right.
Maybe. Okay.
Yeah. And that's what we sought for. We tried to follow his line, and naturally you have individual differences in some regards. Of course, hunting ability was very important. Yeah.
But George Ryman really honed in, from my understanding, on conformation. Looks was a big deal to George, wasn't it?
As well as hunting ability.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
So Davis signed off on you. You guys, thought you guys were heading in the right direction, matching best to best.
And we did. And we took off from there. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. During this time when you guys are really just trying to figure out best to best, which direction to go, and trying to stay true to what George Ryman was looking for, what was the state of the rough grouse in this area? Was the bird numbers plentiful? Can you kind of talk to us about the actual state of the bird population around that time?
It was still excellent. Grouse was. We're talking the early years, the 60s. The 60s were good. Late 50s, even high elevation. Canaan, we haven't gotten the discussion about Canan Valley yet. That'd be a good way to go next. Bird numbers, woodcocks in particular, which I fell into over here. Maybe we ought to get start that way.
Let's go.
Okay, meeting George, or joining George Bird Evans in Canaan Valley. That was going back to 58 now. We met, and we each had the puppies. I'm going back, but it'll give me a chance to discuss Canaan Valley some. I was assigned early assignment to a road check near Franklin, West Virginia. An opening day hunter road check, and Doy Rollison, the state trapper at the time, was there, and he had to run over to Canaan Valley before we were to set up this road, early morning, this road check. He wanted to go over to Canaan Valley to check on a beaver complaint that he might have to blast the dam. He asked me to go along, and I accepted, certainly. I wanted to see this place called Canaan. And we were driving along Sand Run, and I never saw the likes of alder in my life as I did at that point in time on Sand Run. And I asked to get out of the car and go check it out, and let him go on. I suddenly forgot about blasting a beaver dam.
You got distracted along the way.
I was seeing Canaan Valley for the first time. I had to look at it on the ground. So I jumped out and got down into the alders, and sure enough, I found woodcock sign right away. And I met him on his way out, of course. He picked me up, took away. I contacted landowners trying to find out about where to hunt. And of course, the only landowners were in the southern part of the valley, where the farming was being done at the time, and the activity. I located this Ben Thompson, and really got to know the whole family. Ben he grazed the alders. I mean, that was his pasture. He'd mow he had trails on the high points through the alders, mowed trails. And that was the only grass, for his animals to graze. So he, of course, invited me to hunt it and suggested, where in those alders I would hunt. And I then contacted George Evans and arranged to meet him over there that fall of '58, when our pups were 6 months of age. So we met there in Davis. It was a dismal morning. I remember that, dreary and rainy. Anyway, cleared off. I took Evans and all in their vehicle. We drove down into Ben Thompson's. And what is now, for those of you who know, the Timberline Road was right through Ben's alder patch. Ben owned 1,600 acres of that valley floor, and much of it in wetland. But that was his pasture as well. So the story is written up in George's first sporting volume, and the rest of it is history. We got into a flight of woodcocks, the likes. Of course, this was a first for me, too. I'd never seen anything like it. But George had hunted the valley previously, but really for grouse, and never his idea of a flight of woodcocks was just a small group of birds. Here we had, I think it was 30, just rereading his book here recently, I saw the figures, 30, he figured it was 30 birds up for 40 flushes, something like that. There were a lot of birds. They were packed into a relatively small area. That valley, then to describe it was the road, first of all, going in was called the GI Road. George refers to that area in his writings as he called it the Gates, but it was locally known as the GI Road because the U.S. Army troops bivouacked in that area using that road during World War II days. They had a firing range there that shot.
So it's training grounds for them then?
It was, well, a bivouac. They
camping
were
and
camped
overnight
there.
yeah.
Right. They would camp there for a period of time during and fired quite a bit into dolly sods. Ordnance has been, found years later in that dolly sods area, unfired. Some, but we certainly ran into fired pieces. Nevertheless, the valley habitat was, well, first of all, alder and clones of aspen, quaking aspen, and hawthorn, a desirable shrub. The entire valley, or the biggest part, was owned by the power company and open range. So so it was grazed by horses, cattle, and sheep. And this just like Ben, grazing his own alder patch and aspen clones, kept the understory grasses and such down, and it resulted in high quality wildlife habitat, grouse and woodcocks in particular, even more so than grouse. Most of the grouse in those days I used to find either along the Blackwater River itself or transition between the northern hardwoods on the ridges and where they meet the valley floor with beech clumps, hawthorn clumps, and it was ideal, that transition. Ideal grouse habitat was about the best I could find, where woodcocks would be in the lower bottom, of course.
The wetlands that you were describing earlier.
Although they find them right with the grouse, too, sometimes.
Woodcock are going to go where woodcock want to go.
But the valley itself was so different than what you see now. And even dolly sods, too. The sods were, this is before designation of a wilderness, dolly sods wilderness. And it was open to open range in those days. And the difference in forest succession now is dramatic up there. I know I took my daughter for some years, not too long ago rather, out the Blackbird Knob Trail, and I couldn't believe the difference. We couldn't see. I'm used to being up in that country and seeing forever, and forest succession had excluded those views that I was so used to. And now, of course, it's wilderness and very popular hiking and backpacking country.
So you met up with George Evans in Canaan Valley, and so you guys are getting into woodcock, and you're really kind of developing that love for chasing birds in the late 50s. That in the early 60s you start breeding dogs to continue chasing them. As you moved out this way, though, what was the hunting like out this way as opposed to the Canaan Valley that you're kind of getting into with George originally?
Well, Canaan, hunting-wise, Canaan was popular for me then for woodcocks, and primarily woodcocks. But my hunting, it became more popular, of course, as George wrote his books, and popular all the way around. The Canaan Park wasn't even there in the days I described. And one day Ben suggested I hunt up the Blackwater River from Route 32, which crosses the valley. He said, why don't you go up the Blackwater, one side, you can cross over on the beaver dam, come down the other side. Well, that was good news for me. I did. So, and it was a good grouse hunt. And now, of course, it's Canaan State Park, which is a delightful park, but, we don't hunt up the Blackwater there anymore.
Yeah. So at this time, is the woodcock really firing you up, or did you have a preference for either woodcock or grouse?
My goal in working these dogs was to keep a grouse dog. I wanted that. I mean, that one of my three species of wildlife that I feel that I sort of live by, really, and always challenged me, but always preferred. And that'd be the rough grouse to start with, the brown trout, and the third being the black duck, which I grew up with.
All right.
On the Long Island, in the Long Island marshes, particularly the wintering red-legged blacks. To me, black duck is always a trophy. Have to admire its just wanting to be by itself. You know, they are loners, except wintering birds, of course, when they flock up. But always preferred black duck hunting and just admired the bird as I do the ruffed grouse. So I had to hunt grouse. And we did this. I did this. I could never hunt the same covers over and over. Can't get, like you do with woodcocks, because they may be here one day, gone the next. In the case of grouse covers, I would spend much of my time just looking for new covers, rather than going back to where I knew birds were. I wanted to give the birds a break too, but still always looking for some other places to hunt. So the high country, high elevation country was really my favorite around here. The high elevation hawthorn thickets, like you find in usually on national forest lands within their grazing areas. And because of the fact that these areas were grazed, meant a lot. Of course, woodcock-wise too, particularly migrating woodcocks in these same areas. And grouse hunting, of course, up high. But as soon as the severe weather occurred in those early years, we'd come down and hunt the low elevations. All these West Virginia hill counties had good, excellent grouse populations in them. In the 70s in particular, we spent a lot of time hunting what is now underwater in the Stonewall Jackson Reservoir. When those lands were abandoned because of the oncoming, damming up of the West Fork River to create the Stonewall Jackson Lake. The grouse hunting was terrific in these more recently abandoned. It was either reclaimed strip mines or, but still in rough shape. In those days, they planted what was there, and didn't put them back to contour.
I was going to ask
like they do now.
I was going to ask you the reclamation process then compared to now. Now you drive up and down the interstate, you can look up and you kind of see the silver leaves of autumn olive everywhere and different tiered layers, as you were just describing. What were you guys doing back then when you were reclaiming the coal?
They were doing the same thing, but not putting terrain back to contour. The benches would be there.
So it wasn't tiered.
But planted, as you said, autumn olive and what shrubs came in naturally below, on the spoil, below that, like shrubs like crabapple, wild crab. But anyway, shrubs creating desirable habitat for these birds. And it was excellent hunting. Excellent. Rough going, sure. Some of those hills pretty steep.
Yeah.
But that's part of it.
When I first got into grouse hunting in Tennessee, you go into East Tennessee, you got the Smoky Mountains that you're hunting over there. My mentor, old timer Bill, used to tell me that you'd wish that you had different length legs, and then that way you could have one shorter than the next, and you could side scale the hill a little bit easier.
Right. Yeah, I've been accused of that. Yeah, sure.
So. As your knowledge and experience are growing on the rough grouse, and you're really starting to figure it out, and you're adding the covers to your inventory, and you're trying to spread the love, and you're not trying to overpressure a certain area. Talk to me about how the dog work developed. Did their skill level grow along with your experience, and do you think that was a product of you just being able to put them on birds a little bit more efficiently or more often?
Yes, and we brought the dogs along much faster, of course, in those days, because of the bird contacts. Yeah, it was so good. The 80s, I talked about the 70s. The 80s were still good. The 90s, they were really dropping off fast in the areas I'm talking about. other than the high elevations. The western hills, they and of course the soils being richer caused them to
age out quicker.
Grow up a lot faster, sure, than the mountain soils. But they the '90s. I'm thinking I still had some good hunting over there on private lands, timber company lands that were managed on a shorter timber rotation than
public lands.
Public lands, certainly, yeah, like Meade, Westvaco, for example. Paper company had a 40-year rotation, and we had some great grouse hunting.
Yeah, at this time in the '90s, is that when West Nile started popping up here and there? I know in certain areas and regions it started to kind of show up around then. Was it showing up here?
If it did, we didn't pay much attention to it. Not at all. No. Really, we had I remember some bird kills, not grouse, but no. I don't think West Nile affected us much in those days. I can remember a Canada goose die off we had that we just knew it was disease. I don't recall hearing what results came out of the lab on that.
So you preferring higher elevation up there really had to do ultimately with the slower regrowth. It seemed like the cover just stayed in that window a little easier. Because now you hear people say they want higher elevation because of the West Nile concern. But back then you're just talking about from a regen rate.
I was taught. That's exactly right. Now you can still find some grouse at our high elevations. I'd say above 2,800 feet above that. By working, you still find it. It's very difficult, though, and some of that, unless you hunt a Forest Service cut area, it's very difficult vegetation to hunt with spruce in a mix with hardwoods.
Oh yeah.
You can't see anything, but
the
they are grouse.
Diversity is nice, but you can't see anything.
That's right. If you got the legs to handle it, you can still to this day
get in on them.
Get in on some birds, yeah. Not to the extent I'm sure that we were used to back in the old days, but certainly not. But
well, in the '90s,
and still, I'll hear occasional stories of an individual getting into a few,
What about the bobwhite quail in that time? Did you guys still have some? Because I know that y'all have already reintroduced some, in recent years here. When did the quail kind of leave the landscape in this area?
There again, it was a habitat situation. I remember severe weather having an effect, 1960 in western counties, but they bounced back because they still had habitat. Here, the last birds I found in Tiger Valley was 1963. My dogs found it on the valley floor, Tiger Valley. I don't think I even heard of a quail since then.
So
but
almost
there again,
60
it's
years
habitat
ago,
lacking for them. And in general, that's pretty much the case all over.
Right.
We had, let's see, in the 70s, we still had birds, quail, in the Eastern Panhandle. Even later than that, there were fair numbers of birds in the Eastern Panhandle.
Gotcha. But here in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you're just pretty much your only option is rough grouse and woodcock.
Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And it doesn't sound like you were too disappointed in chasing them during that time either.
Not at all. Not at all. No.
So let's get back to the dogs and the progression through the decades, because the birds, throughout all the way through the 90s, and even today, you can still get on them. It's not what it once was, which give me a place where that's untrue, to where today is better than what it was 30, 40 years ago. But talk to me about the dogs during that time and your development and continuing the Ryman Setter line.
During the time we did the research, my co-author Lisa Weiss and I, during this time, and we dug. She did. I had collected. Start from there. I had collected a quantity of Ryman pedigrees, and always interested in the history of these dogs, and collected whatever I could. I found sales listings picturing the dogs that he preferred and or used, and this book was what I wanted to get into in a way. I wanted to, and was encouraged to write what I knew about the Ryman Setter. And I guess this is the reason why I collected all this material. From this, I was able, and from my previous experience with these birds, was able to pretty much determine what he had, what he was producing, and what he strived for. He was a man located in. He started his kennel in Wilkesboro, PA, in 1913, I believe. He actually started breeding. From there, he built his main kennel in Shahola Falls, Pennsylvania, surrounded. This was in the early 1900s when, again, the habitat was there because of the previous logging, and his kennel at Shahola Falls was surrounded by just ideal grouse and woodcock habitat. He didn't have to travel away to
He
find
just go
the
in his
birds.
backyard.
Yeah, and he himself, so he had access to the resource, but he started market hunting grouse, killing grouse for the market, and that's what prompted him, to start
The line.
developing a dog that would suit his needs for that purpose. And he also, in those days, there were so many grouse in that area and its proximity to high populations of people, hunters, that were in need of dogs. So giving them an opportunity for marketing, of course. George Ryman started his breeding combining field trial lines with hunting lines. Laverack, the originator of the hunting dog in England, Edward Laverack, was the source for his type dog that he wanted, but also Llewellyn, the other man, attributed with developing the field type setter. Field trials was his interest, whereas Laverack was more the hunting. They were all used for hunting in those days. The setters were, but they had those differences between them. Ryman combined the two and actually won as a means of marketing or developing a name in setterdom. He combined the bench type with the field type setter, and actually won a couple field trials. This is how he got his start, and then show lines were prominent throughout the 1930s. Very noted ones. His cross to field trial, Hall of Fame, Champion Sports Peerless began in 1939. I was told he did this because his dogs were becoming too slow, and he wanted something more athletic, and too slow and too large. And this is why he bred to the field trial type at that point through this Sports Peerless. He bought sons of Sports Peerless, and there was talk of him. Well, he pretty much failed with those, but he won. He finally bred out of a son, or bred from a son of Sports Peerless Pride, that was a better field dog than Sports Peerless in trials. It was said that Ryman destroyed the Sports Peerless blood that he had. This could be hearsay, but he did kind of keep those bloodlines to himself. Certainly, he didn't want anybody else to have them. It was recorded that he destroyed the sons of Sports Peerless, but he didn't want to continue in his breeding program, of course. He culled heavily, no matter what. He had to develop what he wanted. He hunted his dogs on wild game. That was a big thing from the very start, and insisted on it. He hunted Canada. He'd leave his kennel management and maintenance up to his wife, Ellen, while he took off to Canada with his dogs, the whole run of them. He had up to, 170 dogs at one time.
Man.
But normally it was less than that. I think more averaging about 50 setters at a time.
So he would go up to Canada and just say, "All right, I got to go to work. You take care of the kennel. I'll be back."
Apparently, and she did. She did the work.
Well, hit fast forward a little bit and talk about your line and your development overall. I know that you guys keep harkening back to George Ryman and doing right with his vision and his direction, but talk to me about your continuation of it and within your small breeder group as you guys become more experienced and more knowledgeable and passionate rough grouse hunters in this area. You're trying to hold true with what George Ryman wanted, but talk to me about the actual progression of that line and keeping it healthy and reaching out if you needed to, just kind of walk me through the process of maintaining the line throughout the decades.
Well, fortunately, we ran into, with our small gene pool, we ran into a problem here locally, this small group of breeders. And George Hansen was pretty good at outcrossing. He had more, I was less inclined to outcross. I liked what I had, and I was more for line breeding at the time and just maintaining the type. When you have something that works for you, not wanting to screw it up with a chance and take a chance in outcrossing.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
That's right. But George was, fortunately, I'll have to say, was more aggressive in that sense. And one later, I was to get a pup out of, a female pup from George. He asked me, he said she was ready to pick up if I wanted her. So Ellie and my wife and I ran out. They were living close by here. And we went out to see it. And I told him, George, I just couldn't take that pup. She didn't suit
wanted
me. She wasn't what I wanted in a puppy at that point in time. I said, George, there's only one pup in this litter I will take. And it was a full mask tricolor, gorgeous dog. And George said, you can't have him. He's promised to a fisheries biologist, incidentally, in Pennsylvania. I said, okay, I'll just pass on this litter then. And even my wife on the way out, she wasn't with us when George and I were talking. But my wife had an eye for good-looking setter, too, even a puppy. And on the way out, she said, you're not going to take that pup, are you?
So she
didn't know I
saw some red flags.
Yeah, she saw it, too. All right. So anyway, 6 months later, George called me. He said, you want that a full mass tricolor? I said, I'll be right out. And I did. I picked them up. That was my Ted, Shadbush Ted. Yeah, even at 6 months, George had not done a thing with him. He wasn't outside the kennel. George had penned up, and he was a fabulous dog.
Yeah,
a great grouse dog.
So
Great dog
having him out there for 6 months without doing much with him, it didn't hamper his
no,
development.
There were no faults to break.
Yeah, there's no bad habits.
No bad habits. No, started from scratch, and he let me do it. I mean, he did it. I didn't do anything. He had the genes, he had the blood, but those dogs were half field trial dogs. But I know George had examined that field trial dog closely, and as I found out, of course, later, and even talked to the owner of that dog. But he was, besides being a field trial type, he was a good hunter,
dog,
a good hunting dog. Yes, indeed.
So back then, you said that George hadn't done much with that pup, and this dog, once you got it, kind of did it on his own. Talk to me about what was the process for you guys to develop dogs back then? Was it just go hunting, wild birds only, or would you guys do some yard work and drills? Kind of talk to me about what developing a young pup looked like back then.
All I had to do with that pup is as any other pup that I raised that was teach him a little bit of obedience and introduce them to the game, wild game. That's all we had to do. The rest was up to them.
So no fussing with pen-raised birds or any of that stuff?
No, I didn't. No, there was an exception with one. I did. And I even had a few quail in here and used them right here on my property, but only to see that particular dog, that was Lefty K, to see him pointed the first birdie smell, was one of those captive quail, and took off from there. But that's the only time here of late I used, with later dogs, I used some pigeons. But it used to be, woodcocks were great for this. And they came through, if they weren't here as residents, they came through in the fall. They came back through in the winter. Spring.
Yeah.
So, late winter, February.
So you're taking advantage of both flights.
So, exactly. And it's amazing what one flight of woodcock could do. Getting back to that day with George and his Dawn, George Evans, with his Dawn at 7, those pups were 7 months old. And Dawn started pointing that very day that George Evans and I were in the Canaan Valley. My Jeb was slower at it. He didn't do any pointing that day. That was of course that's the most birds he had seen in one day.
So he probably got a little bird drunk.
And yeah. But it was his beginning. He developed fast after that. He did. He developed very fast.
So obedience and exposure was the name of the game for you. Talk about the obedience. What did you require? Obviously some recall, but were you doing whoa? Talk to me about what you did.
I never did. Of course, I learned from George Evans to use the command stay, and I didn't like to use it. In other words, I expected the dog to know when to stop. All I had to do in that regard was enhance staunchness by handling them on a point. Any dog I had.
And what did handling them on point
look
like?
Stroke them, pet them, whisper sweet nothings in their ears, and grasp, place a hand under the tail against the hindquarters, press, causing them to press against me.
That opposition reflex.
Exactly. And in most cases, I found them staunching up pretty fast. In Ted's case, it took 2 years till he was 2 years of age, because we sat down one day on the hilltop after he'd point, but he'd break and go in. The more aggressive types, were more difficult to staunch up. So this one day, in a fine hawthorn patch, he did that, and I'd set him up each time. Set him up, bang, set him back where he was, make him stay, and go through the same process, even though he wasn't on point. Encouraging staunchness. He wouldn't do it. So that one day I sat him down and we took a break. It's time for us to have a talk, Ted. And I did. We had a talk, talking about all the females he might have friends with, in the future, if he would only shape up, staunch up,
cooperate with you a little bit.
And he did.
So you
it was soon after that. Yeah,
it took the promise of the females to break them.
Yeah, yeah, it really worked.
So
I firmly believe he understood what I was saying.
It sounds like it. So from then on, you didn't have to worry about him breaking in on the birds.
No, not at all. No.
What about the gear that you guys were going out with? Just a flat collar and bell, or did you use a check cord? I mean, I know way back when, they had those telemetry collars that some guys would carry in the woods with them, and just talk to me about your preferred gear.
I didn't have a collar at all then. That was pre-shock collar days or electric collar days, and really I learned, instead of using a shock collar, to me, a tidbit, a small treat, did a world of good. And I used them. I carried them with me and used them constantly, especially teaching. To me, teaching a dog to come, you asked about what we taught or encouraged. The come command was so simple. Or to come to, once we got the pup to come, give him a treat. I don't know why from what I'm reading, some trainers are opposed to this now, or maybe using electric to get them to stimulate or get them to respond. But I found just a little treat is all I needed,
Yeah.
all that pup needed.
Come back and get a bite.
Right, and it was so easy then to get him to, once he came, to get that treat, to teach him to do the same thing to a whistle blast, just by association, simply, and you get a treat for doing it.
So you're getting them to come back, you get a treat, then you overlaid the whistle, and then they
relate the whistle to the command.
And are you using a mouth whistle, or did you actually have an actual whistle, like
mouth
a pea
whistles?
Whistle? Okay.
Like all the old trainers taught me to use the Acme Thunderer. That was the way to go. The whistle to use. I still use them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When did because we were out in your kennel before we got going, saying hey to Katie, and you showed us the first ever beeper collar they came out with. When did the beeper collar and bells come into your life?
I can't remember the year, and I meant to look this up. I couldn't even. The name of that collar I showed you has been worn off, but I've got the literature on it. It was developed by an individual, of course. The design, and this was a blessing, because I was losing. My hearing was deteriorating, of course, and when it had started, and I was having trouble hearing the bell. With that orange belt and setter picture I showed you of Tinker, she was perhaps the biggest running setter I had. Again, she was half field trial breeding, but I was having difficulty finding her, but then I realized when I get fairly close to her, hidden in the brush, of course, I would hear a slow movement of the bell, just a tink, tink.
She's recalling you.
Tink, and then as soon as she knew I was about to see, I had trouble seeing her do this, but I could locate her certainly this way. She was doing it for my benefit, yeah. And one day I did happen to actually see it happen. She'd slowly, without moving her legs, just slowly move her body just enough to make that
she just
bell
said, Walter, come here.
Yeah. So you can imagine when this collar became available, and I'm sorry I don't have the name of that here. It's hidden in my files, but I told you about reading where the Sonic, that was the name of the collar that followed the one I'm speaking of. The Sonic was a good collar, real good. Was a very low tone and a double tone. The originals were the more recent ones that I've been trying to locate. I've been trying to locate the original kind. It lasted about a year and wore out. They had, the original one had wires leading to a tab that attached to the battery, and that was a weak point of it. So they,
kept falling apart on you.
Yeah, for a while I could get that one, the original one, repaired, fix the wires, and as long as there was enough wire left, it worked
enough slack
to repair too. One quick point about enhancing, about pointing, and I always rather than stop and hold the point, I was always fearful of overtraining. I didn't do it.
Right.
Trying to say, I let the dogs, all of them, decide when to move, when to relocate, when not to, And it was so important to me in grouse hunting is to keep voice voices out of the picture. No talking. Especially going in on a bird, a grouse on point. It didn't. No signal at all to
keeping that
somebody
relationship
else.
between dog and bird as natural as possible.
Yes, and to avoid causing a bird to prematurely flush, by talking. And even in banding, woodcocks, night lighting, and capturing birds by banding. The team that did this so effectively in Canaan Valley did so with they operated from a Jeep, a vehicle, and they would get some music playing on the radio, and and when they got out to net the bird, so net over bird, and that worked as long as the music was at an even tempo. But if all of a sudden it blared up, it would cause sudden noise. In other words, causing a bird to flush.
Yeah.
I remember early on waiting for my partner. I had one of the earlier dogs locked up on a grouse, and I was close to the dog, but waiting for my partner to get into shooting position, I kept rustling leaves under my foot as if, just to keep a steady staccato, I guess you'd say, of noise, going, and the partner successfully got in place before the bird went out.
So you're trying to cover up your partner making too much noise coming in. You just wanted the bird to
just
disguise
just
him
kept
coming
like
in.
I was, stopping would cause him to go.
Right.
So I kept it up like I was still walking.
Gotcha.
Still walking, yeah, in leaves.
Yep.
Anyway, I insist on refraining from overtraining. Just insisted on letting dog use his own head, and these Ryman Setters would do that. They're intelligent dogs, and exceedingly so.
Well, you guys developed that intelligent dog throughout the decades, and obviously yourself amongst so many others that have played a part, especially in this region of the country. Where do you see the Ryman Setters moving forward?
Okay, but let me correct you a bit. We didn't develop it. These dogs had it in them, and all we did was try to maintain what they already had.
You guys were just trying not to screw it up.
Exactly, yeah. Which happened, of course, at times.
Right.
The Ryman Setter, Ryman type setter, is being maintained throughout the country by a small group of breeders scattered countrywide who are applying the same principles, the same rules, so to speak, that George Ryman did. In terms, they're looking for the same thing in terms of conformation and hunting wild birds, particularly, not game farm type hunting, but not using hunt tests to evaluate the dogs. They're using hunting qualities of wild birds or on wild birds to evaluate their dogs, their own dogs. Now, there are some individual differences, of course, depending on likes and dislikes, like maybe style, some preferring a tail to be up there where they pointing at the stars, but these are minor differences, The main thing.
Depending on who you ask, some people think it's a little bit more major than minor.
That's
But
true.
the bird dog world
true,
is
yeah.
not lacking for personal preferences.
But individual differences do vary, of course. And that takes play. As long as they're basically doing the same thing, and they're very strict in their health requirements. Insisting that anybody joining this group is getting their dogs OFA'd, certified by OFA, Orthopedic Foundation of America, and also evaluating elbows and bear testing for hearing, making sure the dogs are hearing out of both ears, hearing correctly. Remember that story about the one setter
that
led
you first came across?
That was deaf,
But even that deaf setter still got you away from the beagles and into the bird dog world.
True in part. I hung on to the beagles for a while, same time.
Right.
As George Hansen did with his bird dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah. With his coon dogs. He'd hunt all night, then hunt grouse the next day, hunt coons at night, hunt grouse.
With his coon hounds?
No.
All right.
No.
So yeah, bird dogs.
Once he got his setter.
I was just making sure because I was going to have to dive down that rabbit hole if that was the case. So let me ask you, with the emphasis, the continued emphasis on wild birds over any trials or hunt tests, with the decline of wild bird opportunities in a lot of regions and a lot of areas, what do you think that means for the future of this line to continue? Or is there any concern or discussions amongst you Ryman setter guys in that regard?
Well, to some degree, but remember, some of these people there in the West hunting the prairies, and they're able to get into different species of birds, and it's
so it's not just rough grouse and woodcock contacts. It's just birds in general.
No, but they try. There's always enough birds to get these dogs going if you got the legs to do it. That's what it takes. Grouse are hell, especially in these mountains, but there's always birds. It might take a little longer to do the job, but no, that's not. The main thing is, as I said, they're not evaluating by field testing or field trials, but insisting on work on wild birds. You can always find it. And woodcocks are still. Last year was a great woodcock.
So you're still
not only
getting out
for
yourself.
Me. Right.
So you're still getting out yourself after the birds, right?
I am. I do it differently now. I hunt more in the valley, Canan Valley, than I ever did. Because the terrain is easier going. If I think I'm going to get into a drain situation, a little rough ground, I'll walk with a staff and take somebody with me to carry a gun. I get more of a thrill out of this, to be honest with you, taking these people out that haven't killed a woodcock. I took an orthopedic surgeon out this last year and last season, and this man had killed big game all over the world. He's got a house full of trophies right here in Elkins, a big house, of course. There's an awful lot of trophies in it. And he killed his first woodcock over Katy, you saw out there this year. I've got photos of him holding that bird up, just with big smile, ear to ear smile on his face. He's having it mounted also. Yeah.
So it's
He
going
took
in
it
with
to
all the other
Maine.
trophies.
He couldn't find anybody around here to skin a woodcock.
It's tough. A lot
They
of
do it.
taxidermists won't touch them.
Yeah, exactly what he ran into here. He took it. He got a referral to somebody in Maine who did a lot of woodcock mounting. Took it up there.
Yeah. A lot of taxidermists, they say the skin is too
Yeah.
thin and they don't like messing with it. So
Yeah.
I have a woodcock mount myself with three woodcock all kind of. I got the female and the male down, and then a couple crossing over top. So it's really special to me. But it took a while to find a taxidermist to touch it. So, but you're right. It's really interesting the trajectory of people, throughout the years and their bird hunting career, if you will. It seems like inevitably everybody ends up valuing introducing it to other people or taking more pride over other people shooting over their dogs than themselves. Eventually, it's just kind of like the stages of the hunter.
Exactly. Last few years, I've been working with Healing Waters veterans in Canaan. They join up here every year, and a couple of years ago, the Captain Ed Nicholson, the founder of Healing Waters program, asked me to help this one vet with a Grifflin puppy to get him started. And this man's got one arm. And so in one afternoon, we got that pup into enough woodcocks, and it didn't take many to get that pup starting to point. Yeah, yeah. And the veteran had some shooting difficulty, and that bothered him greatly. And but I was trying to ease his mind by saying, look what the pup's doing. Look what happened in just a few hours' work on a few woodcocks. And to this day, he's become a very close friend of mine, this man. And this year, why, he went beyond shooting his first woodcock, and he's doing well.
Nice.
Yeah, helping others. Yeah, that same dog. But I just get a big kick out of taking. I had an old friend of my son's, living in southern West Virginia, drove up here to hunt with Katie and I and my son. One day, killed his first woodcock. Drove all that distance, had a great day, got into a lot of birds that day. We did. And right near the end of the season, we were running pretty strongly with a lot of birds, and thrilled to death. Well, I'm thrilled too, just to be part of this. This same fella, I can remember a hunt many years back when he told his buddies he was going to shoot me in the leg to cripple me so he could catch up. I told him this year, I said, you don't have to shoot me in the leg any longer. He's able to
But you know
handle
what?
it.
It's a great testament. It's like you're saying, if you really want it, if you have the legs for it, essentially, if you have the desire to find birds, they're out there. They may not be in your backyard. They may not be every walk and every cover like maybe they once were. They're not around every tree.
Right.
But if you're determined and you actually want to go get your dog on birds, they're out there.
They're out there. You
just,
can do it.
You can't find them on your couch. You can't find them on a GPS map scouting. You have to actually go out there and put boots on the ground. And you're a great testament to this, where you've been doing it for decades, but you're still 90 years old as a spring chicken. You're getting out there doing it with everybody else still. I mean, if you're still out there doing it, there's really no excuse for other people to not give it a shot.
Exactly. I'm not doing it the same way, nor as hard going, of course. in my time, I have to take a break after a good 2 to 3 hour hunt. I got to take a day or two off, catch up, certainly. But I feel blessed that I'm still able to put one foot before the other and enjoy these dogs. That's the whole thing. I always said 75% of my enjoyment is the dogs and the work I get, the work they give me. The other 25% is the habitat and my interest in what's there and why it's there and maybe how to manage it, which I did as a career, and that was my biggest job anyway. Was management, habitat management. Uh, and in between the federal government, in this case the Forest Service, and the state, and assisting Forest Service in wildlife management activities on federal lands.
Well, as we kind of close this conversation out, I'm curious, as somebody who's been around for as long as you have, for the better part of a century, and you've witnessed not only just the habitat, the progression as well as the regression, as well as dog development, as well as tools and everything. I'm curious your outlook and your perspective, where you think upland hunting is today, and are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of upland hunting as a whole? What are your thoughts about that?
It's a tough question. It's becoming more difficult all the time. Of course, access to the lands, and how the lands are being managed. Even I know this is. I'm talking about public lands being managed and priorities, and even the biologists have changed. I've been called a dinosaur, and I know now why. Many of the It used to be that the first question I was asked, and therefore asked anybody I was interviewing of my people, was, do you hunt? Do you fish? If they didn't, you can't, now it's people are being hired that maybe don't participate in the whole program.
They just like animals, so they go to school for wildlife biology, and then they come out and they don't have any skin in the game within hunting and fishing. Yeah. They just liked wildlife, so they went and got a degree, and now that they're the ones managing the habitat.
These are, and so therefore, it's a bleak future in that regard to me, and it affects those of us that in a way of access, in a way of management, as I said, programs that maybe not doing what we feel. Canaan Refuge is an example of what I'm talking about. When that refuge was first started, and it was they did some habitat work in the way of aspen regeneration. The aspen was getting too old to the point where it's deteriorating, too large, no longer sprouting when cut. And they went into stands that were still ready to be cut and of the age that would regenerate fast, get a lot of stem density. And this is something, and forest management in general is just not looked upon as a priority. It's more planting red spruce, invasive species, eradication of the invasive ones, and things that are not maybe addressed to the way some of us want it to be
Right.
pointed. Yeah.
So it doesn't sound like you're too optimistic in some regards, unfortunately, but it's kind of reflective of a lot of the people that care and love this activity the way we do. And when it comes to the dogs, we want wild birds for our dogs. So, I was, if you could wave a magic wand, Walt's magic wand, and fix something, what would it be that could maybe put us back on the right track?
I don't want to look at it. That's tough to answer. Al. I don't want to. I'm encouraging folks to participate. I'm not discouraging them. There's always some good. There's always a good sunrise to see, or sunset. In my case, I'd rather see sunset. But there's always a good reason to be out there and enjoy what's there. Besides the bird itself, the dog. There's the habitat. There's the atmosphere. I'll never discourage anybody from any outdoor recreation form. Certainly not. And that includes hunting of grouse and woodcock.
Mm-hmm. I don't think there's any better way to wrap this up than on that positive note right there. Just encouraging people to get out. Walt, I appreciate you taking the time, inviting us in your home. I love all the collections. I mean, you pretty much have a display of all the years that you've been doing this, and your respect and admiration for birds as a whole. It's very evident as you walk through your home.
Thank you. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Yeah.